issues other than the interplay, which I'll be covering in the initial half an hour, there probably I think we'll have a small discussion, but more or less we'll try to put them as posers and food for thought for the participants. And because I really want more discussion around, I've prepared about 8 to 9 case studies, 6 of which are really interesting to discuss. So probably I want more discussion in those case studies, which really targets the interplay between EL, royalty, and FTS, and maybe 2016 EL, new EL, and royalty or and FTS. So I think I'll go in that flow in terms of taking up the presentation. So we'll start with the basics of EL first, and start with the background. So how it all came up, the taxation of digital economy in the first place. So we all know that there has been a lot of BEPS work which has happened on taxation of digital economy. After which lot of years put in, after which the action plan 1 came up, and which posed 3 options. Did not conclude anything, but really posed 3 interim options for countries to exercise. One is a SEP, second is the withholding tax, and third is the equalization levy. And these options were given to all the countries to put down in their respective domestic law. India looks to have opted for all 3 over a period of 5 to 6 years. Yeah, riders that existing treaties should be respected were there. However, Indian equalization levy, we all know that goes beyond the scope of the treaty, and probably there could be a discussion around that whether the benefit of the treaty should be allowed or not in case of applicability of equalization levy. So after the action plan was released, India immediately came out with EL 2016, which was specifically made applicable to advertisement and similar services. The rate was 6%. Then after 2 years of EL1, we introduced a concept of SEP under the domestic law, and we also brought out the draft attribution rules, which has the country of market approach in March 2019. Later on, Finance Bill 2020 deferred SEP provision, rightly so, because they were practically not implementable in absence of changes to treaty. New explanation 3A was introduced. Again, I'm assuming it will be discussed in the next session where we are discussing interplay between EL and explanation 3A. Interesting point to be discussed there would be whether 3A operates independently or it does need explanation 2A, which is deferred for a couple of years. So whether 2A and 3A goes hand in hand, or 3A can independently operate with the basics of business connection under 9.1. We also introduced in the Finance Bill 194.0 TDS. I'll be covering one slide on that, but again rushing through that today. Bill was really silent on the new EL on e-commerce operator, and at the time of passing the Finance Act, suddenly we saw that EL 2020, which is on all e-commerce operator, which much wider scope as compared to what was there in EL1, has been introduced in the Finance Act directly without it being in the Finance Bill. So let's look at what this new EL 2020 provision looks like. So it has a definition of e-commerce operator. It applies to an e-commerce operator. E-commerce operator is a person who is responsible for discharging the EL, paying the EL. And e-commerce operator really means a person who is a non-resident and who owns, operates, or manages digital or electronic facility or platform for any online sale of goods or online provision, electronic facility or a platform. All these independent, but essentially there has to be an and that has to be for the purpose of online provision of goods, online sale of goods, or online provision of services. Now, what do you mean by e-commerce? So what is taxed or what is leviable to equalization levy? It is a transaction of e-commerce supply or services. And what does e-commerce supply or services means? It means online sale of goods owned by the e-commerce operator or online provision of services provided by the e-commerce operator. So where the e-commerce operator owning the electronic facility or the digital platform himself sells goods online through the platform, himself provides services online through the platform. The third bullet point is where the platform owner is a separate person, but it facilitates sale of goods or provision of services through its platform. Again, the platform owner is covered under the EL, not the seller or the purchaser. And lastly, any combination of the above. So that's the scope and coverage. Who is liable to tax? What are the transactions we are looking at? Now, does it mean all transactions of online sale of goods or services are taxable? No. So now we talk about how there is a nexus to India, and that is where we talk about who is really, sorry, when does these ESS in the hands of e-commerce operator become leviable to equalization levy? So chargeability rate says 2%, EL is chargeable at 2%. What is it chargeable on? It is on consideration received or receivable by an e-commerce operator from e-commerce supply or services made or provided or facilitated. So either e-commerce supplier himself provides services, himself supply goods, or is facilitating supply of goods or services for a third party seller. In all these cases, the consideration received by e-commerce operator is liable to 2% EL. Services are to be provided to whom? To a resident of India, or sale of goods has to happen to resident of India, or to a person who buys such goods or services, or both, using an IP address located in India. So physical presence of the person sitting in India is important. Person's residence in India is important. And in case of a non-resident person, it's only applicable in certain specified circumstances. Now, what are these specified circumstances? At the bottom of the slide, there are two such circumstances which are prescribed, where probably an e-commerce operator, being a non-resident, is providing goods or services to another non-resident person, and still we are saying it will be leviable to EL. And that is when there is a sale of advertisement from NR to NR, which targets a customer who is resident in India, or a customer who is accessing advertisement through an internet address protocol located in India. And second is sale of data which is collected from an Indian resident or from a person who is using an Indian IP address. Again, even if the sale of data is between two non-residents, being the e-com platform operator and the recipient of the data, as long as the data is procured from India, from an Indian resident or from a person using Indian IP address, that becomes leviable to equalization levy. Now, there are certain exemptions. One exemption is for a small turnover person. Not everyone and anyone is liable to EL. So a person who is e-commerce operator who is having a turnover of less than 2 crores is not liable to EL. An e-commerce operator making or providing or facilitating e-commerce supply or services through a PE in India will anyways pay a tax which is attributable to the PE in India, and therefore he is not liable to EL. He is given an exclusion. Or somebody is already covered under existing EL under 65, which is EL1, EL 2016, in case of an advertisement or related services. That person has a specific exclusion here. That's the text of the section. We'll come back to it when we discuss the first issue. The first issue, so whatever we have seen right now, there are a host of issues. As I said, every word probably is subject to interpretation. And the first issue which I wanted to highlight was in case where an e-commerce operator is a facilitator, he is not selling the goods himself, he is selling it for a third party, and say he receives a consideration for 100 from an Indian resident. He retains 20 with him and passes on 80 to the seller of the goods. Now, seller of the goods may or may not be selling goods online through his own portal. He is just selling the goods through the facilitator. Will EL really 2% EL apply on the entire consideration that he receives of 100 rupees, or only the consideration which actually belongs to him, which is the 20 rupees retained by him? If really EL is paid on 100. Now, first let's discuss what really happens, because if we see the language, it says on and from 1st April 2020, there shall be charged an EL at the rate of 2% of the amount of consideration received or receivable by the e-commerce operator from e-commerce supply or services made or provided or facilitated by it. Now, what do you mean by consideration received by e-commerce operator from e-commerce supply or service is facilitated by it. Now, one view could be that consideration means entire sum of money, which is 100 rupees, which seems to be the intention of the department. However, if we just were to technically read, it says consideration received by an e-commerce operator. Now, consideration received by an e-commerce operator really should mean the consideration that belongs to him and not what he has actually collected on behalf of the seller. And therefore, the second view could be, and the technical strict reading view could be that it should apply only on 20. Now, let's see if it were to be applied on 100, what could be, I've given one example, there could be more, but what could be the side effects? Now, if EL is paid on 100, say for example, there is a non-resident platform owner who has listed goods of an Indian seller or a non-resident who is having a PE in India. So the seller is either a resident of India or the seller is a non-resident but has a PE in India, and he is selling the goods through a third-party facilitator who is the e-com platform owner or e-com operator. Correct? He will, such resident seller will anyways be liable to tax on his profits in India, or such NR having a PE in India would anyways pay tax on income attributable to that PE in India. In addition, on the entire 100, if e-commerce operator is liable to 2% levy, then are we taxing the same income twice, once under EL and again under the domestic law provisions? So such kind of anomalies might come up, and therefore, according to me, a better view is that EL should apply on 20, which is the consideration which is retained by the e-commerce operator in case of a facilitation. So that's the first issue which I wanted to cover. Second issue is whether EL applies only on highly digitized product and services, or does it really also apply where an order is placed online and goods are delivered physically? Now, the language clearly suggests that it is not restricted to highly digitized products or services. And therefore, the language of the law as it stands today, it applies to everything that is covered within the definition of ESS, where it is online sale of goods and services, even if the order is placed online, is as long as you can call it an online sale, which is concluded online, delivery really would not matter. Physical delivery really would not matter in terms of applicability of EL. The third issue which I wanted to pose was booking of an overseas hotel through a website, whether covered. So take a situation where I book an hotel on a non-resident e-commerce platform owner's website for a travel abroad. Now, what will really happen? I will conclude the transactions online. However, I will travel abroad and then receive the renting or the hotel services, hospitality services from the hotel offline when I actually go there. Now, strictly speaking, if we go by the language of the definition of e-commerce supply or services, it says there has to be online provision of services. When it comes to sale of goods, there has to be a conclusion of sale. Delivery is not important. But when it comes to services, we are saying that there has to be a provision of services online. The contract may be concluded somewhere else, but provision of service has to be online. And in this case, probably the language of the section would not cover this kind of an example, and therefore, according to me, merely booking for a service online when the actual services are provided offline would, as the law reads today, would not cover a situation of it would not get covered under ESS, and therefore consequently would not be liable to EL. The next issue in these initial provisions is EL covers advertisement which targets a customer resident in India or who is using an Indian IP address. Now, what do you mean by targets a customer? Does it mean that there has to be a specifically advertisement which is specifically targeting and viewable by only Indian residents? Or does it mean that probably there is some foreign magazine which is available online for an Indian IP address to access? Correct? There might be only 2 people in India sitting and accessing that magazine. But does it mean that it is targeted towards an Indian customer? How do you really, so there is, this phrase is really a little subjective, but I would say probably something where the target is really an Indian customer is what should be covered. Any incidental advertisement which is viewed by an Indian customer, which is available for public at large, should ideally not be covered here. Next issue is goods not defined. Therefore, can have a wider meaning. Again, we'll cover this goods and sale definition part in one of the case studies when we come to the interplay. So I'm not discussing much on that here. We'll have a detailed discussion there about the GST law and sale versus license in case of a royalty or in case of a software sale. Next issue is provisions cover sale of data by NR, which is collected from Indian residents or from a person using IP address. Now, really speaking, the provision talks about sale of data, which is collected. It does not, in language, it does not include sale of data, which is further processed and a report is generated out of the data. The data is normally never sold, normally in a public parlance, it is never sold as it is. It is collected, it is analyzed, there are few reports prepared out of the data, and then those reports are really sold. So again, probably the language, although it intends to cover that kind of a transaction where you collect data from the Indian customers, which is sold, which is analyzed and sold to the foreign another NR, but probably the language might be loose enough to escape that kind of a case where there is a processing of data before it is sold. So that probably could be one more issue which might come up for litigation or for discussion in future. These are the 6 important queries which I have put across. It's on the first aspects of chargeability, e-commerce operator definition, and ESS. Any specific discussions on any of these points which have covered the first 6 issues which I have covered? Any specific discussions on these issues? Then we open to discussion right now. Otherwise, I'll move forward. I think there's something in the top.
Yeah, Amarnath,
yes,
you can speak. You can.
Yeah, Amar, please.
Okay, so you mentioned about the where the goods have been delivered. I mean, sold online. So when would you say that the goods have been? The sale is concluded online. Wouldn't the delivery of the goods matter that time? That when the property and goods has been transferred, and when it is transferred is when the goods are delivered to the customer. So wouldn't that be a crucial point to consider? When the goods have, whether the sale has been concluded online or not.
Absolutely. So wherever the contract says that the title or the property in the goods passes to the customer on delivery, probably we are again in for a discussion as to whether there is no sale online and therefore not liable to EL. Certainly the department's intention is to cover those transactions under the EL. But strictly speaking, if the contract says that sale is concluded once the delivery happens, then what you are saying is definitely correct.
Okay.
Karthik, in the
Yes, sir.
example, this hotel case,
Yes.
it was discussed that the hotel we are booking it online and then we are provided the services is providing offline.
Correct.
So
Correct.
similarly is with the goods also. You are providing, see, you are
So
booking it online.
language of the provision, if we see, is different. It says e-commerce supply or services means online sale of goods. It does not say delivery of goods. Whereas when it comes to services, it says online provision of services. So that's the finer difference between the two limbs of the definition of ESS.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think I'll move forward. The next is the exclusions, which we discussed in the earlier slide, which are under the 165(a)(2). And as we discussed, there are 3 exclusions. One where you are already liable to the old EL, the advertisement EL. Second, where you have a PE in India and you are anyways otherwise paying tax, and such services are effectively connected to the PE. And third is a threshold of 2 crore rupees. Now, a couple of issues which I have highlighted here. One is crossing of 2 crore threshold in a financial year triggers EL from the first rupee itself. Right? Now, the first due date was really 7th of July, and we have to keep paying it quarterly. So how do you really estimate whether the 2 crore threshold is going to cross or not? Now here somebody might want to say that the same applies to an advanced tax under the Income Tax Act, but I would say it's a little different, where really speaking, in case of an advanced tax, yeah, even if you miss the budget by a margin, then you are still liable to pay advance tax, but on a lower amount. However, if you are here, if you are 1.9 vis-a-vis 2.1, it might be a possibility of applicability versus non-applicability. And this is really then more akin to a service tax or a GST threshold. And therefore, I remember in service tax, I think there was a provision that that once you cross the threshold, you have to start paying service tax or something like that, or you see the preceding year's number. So probably some provision in lines of that may be a welcome move if there is a clarification issued. That was one issue here. Second issue was that the exclusions cover a case of EL, which is leviable under 165, which is EL 2016. Now, if there is a case where a non-resident provides advertisement service, now mind you, this advertisement service very strictly, if it is provided online, it is still covered under the new EL as well. So there is an overlap between 2016 and 2020, and which is why there is an exemption that although you might be covered under both the ELs, if you are leviable to the old EL, you don't get covered under the new. Now, old EL itself has an exemption of 1 lakh per customer. So if per customer, if the service amount is less than, or the consideration amount is less than 1 lakh, then the customer is not liable to, Indian customer is not liable to pay EL under the 2016 EL. Now take a case where NR provides advertisement service online to customers in India, and NR's total turnover is 2.5 crore, which means he is crossing the threshold of EL 2020. Now it consists of 1.25 crore worth of services, which is leviable to 6% EL, and 6% EL has been paid by the Indian customers. However, balance 1.25 crores worth of service did not exceed the threshold of 1 lakh, which means it is given to many customers at a price of 50,000 per customer or 75,000 per customer, and therefore each such transaction was under the exemption. And therefore, on 1.25 crores worth of income that or consideration that the service provider has received, there was no EL 2016 paid. Correct? Can we really say that this second 1.25 crore was not leviable to EL under section 165 and consequently be liable to 2%, new 2% EL? So again, a thing which reads the bare reading of the language suggests that yes, balance 1.25 crore will be liable to 2% EL. Any thoughts or discussion here on these 2 points from anyone? Okay, I'll move forward. Next, we come to the 1050 exemption and the issues in relation to the same. So the way the 1050 exemption, which was always there for the 2016 EL, they've just added and extended this exemption to any income arising from an e-commerce supply or services made or provided or facilitated on or after 1st April 2021 and chargeable to equalization levy. So the first issue is the date of mismatch, because EL kicks in from, it's already kicked in from financial year 2021. So it's already in operation. However, the exemption is granted from next year, which means this financial year, probably you are covered under the normal income tax provision also, wherever it applies, which, and you are also covered under the EL. So there is a mismatch in the exemption provision. So even if you are paying EL, you are exposed to the Income Tax Act to the extent applicable. Whether, second question is whether exemption can be extended to the seller. So take a case where there is a non-resident seller who is having a PA in India, or a resident seller who has posted his goods on the website of an e-commerce operator, a non-resident e-commerce operator. Now that non-resident e-commerce ESS and e-commerce operator, in that case, the exemption reads and it's applicable vis-a-vis the income arising from e-commerce supply or services, and it does not restrict itself to the income of the e-commerce operator. And therefore, there is a possibility from the language that even a seller who could be a resident Indian who is selling goods through an e-commerce operator offline might be able to have an access, going by the plain reading of the language, might be able to have an access to the said exemption. And logically, if department wants to tax the, as we discussed, wants to tax the entire 100 of the consideration which is received by the e-com operator, then logically, really speaking, this exemption sounds logical. But if we are saying that only 20, which is the consideration of e-commerce operator, is being taxed under EL or leviable under EL, then this probably the language gives an added benefit to the seller, which probably might not be the intention of the law. So from the first bullet point, drawing further from the first bullet point, there could be an overlap between online provision of service and such services also being which is covered by the EL, and such services also being covered under either 916, either 917, or even the new explanation 2A and 3A. So we are looking at the overlap or interplay between EL and 916 and 917 royalty FTS, and I think there is a next session specifically planned for discussing the interplay between explanation 3A, explanation 2A, which are the SAP provisions, and EL. So that interplay will be covering it under a separate session altogether, and probably there might be interplay between all four as well: royalty, FTS, SAP, and EL. And that also probably can be picked up in the next session. Coming to the compliances, the law is straightforward in terms of compliances: 7 July, 7th October, 7 Jan, 31st March. Some issues, there is a simple interest if you are in default of payment. There is a penalty and prosecution in case of a false statement, and you have to additionally furnish a annual statement on or before 30th June every year. Some issues, non-resident e-commerce operator might face issues in opening bank account if they don't have any presence in India. So they probably might, either department might form up rules for a simplified procedure, or probably they might have to tie up with an Indian bank. This would have already been done because the first tranche of the EL has already been paid. Then EL for the March quarter is to be paid by 31st March. Now, I don't know how practical is it to close the books on 31st March, immediately identify the amount which is liable to EL, and then pay that on the same day. Again, probably delay here by at least a month, like we have 2 months, like we have for the TDS provision. Appeal is allowed only against an order imposing penalty under the EL. There is no appeal on the charge per se, and therefore that also probably can be represented, recommended, and well, it would be welcome if there is an appeal mechanism provided for this. Somebody might say that the appeal mechanism was also not there in the 2016 EL. Probably the coverage there was fairly low as compared to the 2020 EL, and therefore it has not been much talked about in past. But probably going forward, lot more assessees will be getting covered under this particular EL, and therefore a lot of explanations and clarifications are expected on this particular EL. And probably we should see an FAQ soon. I don't know what is holding back the government to clarify on all these issues. Before I go to 194.0, anything on the basics of EL, interplay obviously we'll discuss in the case studies between royalty, FTS and EL, but otherwise on whatever is discussed, any points or any addition or any further discussion on any of these points from any of the participants? Okay, I'll move forward. Quickly running through 194.0, and yeah, so this applies to an e-commerce operator where he is making a payment to a resident e-commerce participant. So a resident seller, e-commerce operator may be a e-commerce operator means so e-commerce operator, person who owns, operates and manages a digital electronic facility or a platform for e-commerce, could be resident as well as non-resident. TDS on payment or credit to the account of the e-commerce participant. So whatever e-commerce pays, so in our example of e-commerce operator receiving 100 and paying 80 to the seller, retaining 20 with him, on that 80, if he is making a payment to a resident participant, then he will have to, who is selling the goods, then he will have to withhold taxes, 1% tax under this particular provision. Now, this 1% is presently reduced to 0.75 because of the ordinance. But here really the idea is to get a reporting, online reporting of these transactions, and not collection of tax actually is not the idea. The idea is to get all these transactions reported so that the smaller sellers, who are actually escaping, not filing the returns and escaping the attention of the department, can be automatically caught hold of and sent notices to really check whether at net level whether they are earning income or not and paying taxes or not. Even there is a limit of 5 lakhs if you furnished a PAN, and if your sale of service through the e-commerce operator is less than 5 lakhs, then the provisions of 194O are not applicable. If you are liable to deduct tax under 194O, you are not liable to deduct tax under any of other provisions like 194C or 194J, depending upon the nature of services. A few issues here. I think first one I'll skip. The question was really whether it was the right time to bring in such kind of a provision and in such a haste where the assessees or the consultants do not even have time to understand what the provisions are, and in 2 months or 3 months time the payment date had come. But it has come. We have to live with it. At least probably what I would want to represent is to not delay the provisions altogether, but really speaking, the interest could have been foregone for the first year because it was practically very difficult for somebody to really check the applicability given so many unanswered issues, unclear definitions of the phrases and terms used in the provisions. So from that perspective, it would have been great if the interest was waived for the interest and penal consequences were waived for the first year, keeping the levy aside so that the collection of the tax is not affected. It might be delayed, but it might not be affected in terms of the overall collection of tax. So that could have been one representation. Second is whether EL is tax on income and therefore eligible to relief under the treaty. I think discussed at a lot of forums. We'll not spend time on it. We'll concentrate more on the interplay today. Can be a good 45 minutes to 1 hour session on this itself. Can FTC be claimed for EL in the home country? It depends upon country to country. If your home country is kind enough to give the credit, yes, like the DDT was available as a credit in some of the countries. The countries themselves came back and said that yes, we want to consider it as tax on dividend income and therefore give the credit. If similarly some country come up with an internal law that yes, we'll give you FTC, then yes, but it's strictly not covered by the treaty unless the home country has all the rights to give the credit under the domestic law itself. Like we have 91, similar provisions can be there under the home country law. In many e-commerce transactions, there might be overlap of 194O and EL. I gave a classic example where a resident seller is posting his goods on a non-resident e-com operator's website, and that e-com operator is the e-com operator is liable to EL as well as he is liable to deduct TDS on payments to the resident seller out of the money collected from the customer in India. So to that extent, yes, there could be overlap, or I would say EL operator will have to do two compliances. One is the TDS compliance as well as the EL compliance. Now, before we jump to interplay between EL royalty and FTS,
Karthik,
anything on
what there is one
so
query on the
yes,
chat
sir.
box.
Yes, Rajbhai.
There is one query on the
That's
chat box.
Yep, I'm opening it. Online order placed from IP address outside India, but goods to be delivered in India, whether EL will be applicable. So here, I think, Dalpat Bhai, if you can unmute yourself and tell me if the e-commerce operator is offline, right? is non-resident, right? The website owner or the platform owner is offline.
Yeah, presume that na, that is non-resident operator.
Just one minute. So if he is a non-resident owner of the platform facility, yes, he gets covered under the e-com operator definition. Coming to the sale of goods, I'm assuming that the sale of goods online, concluded online is condition is met, and therefore it is an ESS. Coming to the chargeability, it says it has to be sold to or provided to a resident in India. Now, if it is sold to a non-resident or a person sitting outside India, I think either of them is covered. So in your case, it is a person you've mentioned. It is a person who is ordering. The purchaser is a person ordering from outside India. But whether he's a resident of India or not, I'm assuming he's a non-resident and he is gifting to someone in India. I would say it's not covered under the existing EL just because the delivery is happening in India. You need to say who is the purchaser of the goods, and to my understanding, it would not be applicable. EL would not be applicable unless the purchaser is an Indian resident. Again, practically, I am not sure if any foreign site would permit delivery in India, where a foreign site where the booking is happening online will permit any delivery in India. But assuming if that is possible, still just because there is a delivery in India, the purchaser and seller both being outside India, I would not say that it is liable to EL, going by the language of the law. Sorry, any alternate views on this particular query? I'll move forward, Rajbhai.
Yeah.
So in Interplay, the first case study, I've tried to be as simplistic in terms of and non-complex in terms of the case study drafting as possible, and broken down. Sorry, I think there is some more chat in the chat box. Yeah, no problem, Dalpat bhai. Yeah, so here is a case where FCO is selling a software to ICO. ICO is downloading the software online from FCO's website. So ICO purchases the software from FCO and downloads the same from the website. The turnover of FCO1 is more than 2 crores in both the years, FY 2021 and 2022. The question is whether tax under 195 is to be deducted for first year, for second year, and whether both years it is liable to equalization levy. So can we, Rajbhai, have discussions from the participants here on their views?
Yeah, and it is open to everyone.
Yep. So I think we divide the discussion on whether it is royalty under the treaty and consequently whether 195 applies. And then we move on to the EL.
Continue, Karthik.
Yes, Pankaj. Yeah, I'll continue.
Can analyze the case studies.
Sure. Okay, fine. So I'll go ahead with analyzing, and if there are any contrary views, please feel free to interject. Sorry, Pankaj, there is some background noise. Yeah, thanks. So I'll go to the views, whether it is royalty under the Income Tax Act. The classic argument of copyright versus copyrighted article comes into play here. Correct. I'll try to spend lesser time on what is the domestic law, but I'll definitely give a recap of what has happened. So classic case of copyright versus copyrighted article discussed a lot. Samsung in a cluster of rulings have ruled. So the provision says transfer of all or any right in respect of a copyright is what is covered under the royalty. correct? So whether when you buy a software, whether it is transfer of any right in the software, or whether it is a copy of the software that you are buying, and you don't buy any right in that software. So there are bundle of rights in a copyright. A software copyright owner would have a bundle of rights through the copyright, correct? And whether it is some of these rights which are being transferred to the user, or whether it is a case of a transfer of a copyrighted article, which means a copy of the software which is made. Correct. So that's the clear discussion. Samsung has said that the end user is allowed to make a copy on his own computer, and therefore to that extent he gets the right to make copies of that particular software which he has bought, and therefore yeah, again, the price paid by the end user, Samsung says the right price paid by the end user is not for the CD or for the excess, it is for the software actually, and therefore really speaking it falls under the definition of royalty, even pre-amendment, and therefore it should be regarded as royalty under the act and therefore be taxed accordingly. There are a series of rulings which are in favor. Delhi High Court in Ericsson AB, Bombay High Court in Myco Biotech, Madras High Court in Vinzas Solutions. All of them have really said that this is not a royalty. It is the basic thing is that it is the copy of the software which is sold, which is a goods, and which is not a right in respect of any copyright which is sold to the customer. And merely because the customer is allowed to make copies and store on his own laptop or on his own computer or on his own hard drive doesn't mean it becomes a royalty. It is true with purchase of any goods that really speaking he can make multiple copies for his own use, but in case of a software he is not allowed to explore it further. He doesn't have any other copyright right, a right in respect of any copyright which he gets, and therefore these other judgments really say that it is not. So we have different judgments from different high courts, and matter is pending before the Supreme Court to see what happens. Pending which Finance Act 2012 or 13, I think, inserted explanation 4 to clarify things retrospectively with effect from 1/4/1976 to say, and explanation 4 says, for the removal of doubts, it is hereby clarified that the transfer of all or any rights in respect of any right, property or information includes and has always included transfer of all or any right for use or right to use of a computer software, including granting of license, irrespective of the medium through which such right is transferred. Now, a question here is, although the intention is really to cover the transaction which we are discussing about and which has conflicting judgments from different high courts, correct? Does the language of explanation 4, which also takes you back to a fact that there has to still be a transfer of right or transfer of all or any right to use in relation to a computer software? The argument really is that I am still selling goods. I am still selling a copy of the software, and therefore there is no, even in respect of a computer software, there is no transfer of any right in the computer software. It's just a copy of the software which is sold. And that argument, I would say, even after explanation 4, technically still sustains, correct? However, going by the intention of the law amendment, specific amendment of the law, I think it will be a very aggressive view to take that you will not be taxed even despite explanation 4. If you come under the treaty, covered under, whether it is covered under the royalty article under the treaty, for the same argument, I would say no, as my view. Whether the extended definition of explanation 4 applies to treaty, my answer really would be no, that it does not apply to the treaty. However, we await Supreme Court's judgment on this aspect as to whether we can call it a transfer of a right in respect of copyright, or whether it is a sale of a particular product, a copy of the software, being a copy of the software. When now we come to whether EL applies, and in that case, the first question really to be answered is software, whether it is goods or services, because as we saw in the definition, there has to be either online sale of goods or there has to be online provision of services. Now, therefore, it is very important to check, unlike GST where both are taxable in all the senses, here vis-a-vis goods, it has to be sale of goods, vis-a-vis services, it has to be provision of services. And therefore, there are two different trigger points in terms of leviable to EL. And therefore, we have to first see whether it is goods or services. I think the judiciary is tending towards this being goods. There is Tata Consultancy, there is Infosys Technology. Infosys, in fact, gives very good good guidance on why it should be a good. And it says there are few characteristics of something being a goods, and which are, it should be capable of being bought and sold. It should be capable of some utility. It should be capable of being transferred, transmitted, shared, and possessed. Delivered, shared, and possessed. So all these are the characteristics which Infosys Madras High Court has very nicely explained, that if the software possesses these all qualities, then there is no doubt that it is goods and it is not a service. Be it tangible or be it intangible, does not matter. So I would, reading these judgments, I would tend to think more or conclude more to say that software is a goods, a copy of the software in the facts of the present case, where I'm downloading a software. It is nothing but a purchase of goods, online purchase of goods. Now the next question is really whether, so when it comes to goods, to apply EL and to get it covered within the definition of e-commerce supply and services, what really needs to be seen is that there has to be a sale of goods. Correct? Now, download of software, whether it is sale of goods or merely a license. Now we go back to the original controversy, where probably we've already looked at that license is, when they say that you sign an EULA, the thought is not really to give you any license to do a sub license or to explore it in a manner in the case of an end user agreement. The thought is that you cannot, it's a negative covenant as to say that you cannot do anything, and that's why they don't call it a sale, they call it a license, to just protect certain rights of reproducing or recopying and commercially exploiting that software further in the manner that you want. And therefore they really call it a license, but it is actually deemed to be a sale of a copy. And therefore I would want to tend to again a view that it is, software is the goods, and or a copy of the software which you get on your, which you download on your computer from an overseas seller's website, is nothing but a goods, and it is sale of goods to an Indian resident, and therefore in all possibilities should be liable to equalization levy, even though if it gets out of royalty. Now assuming that Supreme Court upholds the view taken by Samsung Electronics Karnataka High Court and says that this is liable to royalty, and it assuming that it becomes taxable in India under 916, and it is also liable to EL, correct? How does a payer, while withholding tax, if a payer wants to take a view that it is royalty after the conclusion of Supreme Court judgment, how does a payer take a view that whether I have to withhold taxes under 195 at 10% on the royalty income, or whether the person is liable to EL, and what is the interplay really, which overrides the other? Correct. So year one, as we saw, there is a mismatch in the exemption provision. Year one, really speaking, the issue is that both of them applies, and therefore unless department clarifies what happens during the year one, there seems to be a double taxation very clearly. We are expecting a clarification from the department that either one overrides the other. Department's view seems to be that 2% EL does not give you a benefit in cases where otherwise 10% royalty or FTS is really applicable, and therefore to that extent probably a clarification that might come would be that in case you are already taxable under 916 or 917 royalty FTS, then you don't pay EL, you pay 10% withholding tax, and therefore practically when we are making such payments, if we are taking a view that this is royalty or this is FTS, And the advice or the suggestion would be that we go ahead and withhold the taxes as per the act read with the treaty, and don't bother about EL being applicable wherever the taxes are applicable as per the act and the treaty. Wherever the taxes are genuinely not applicable because of the source rule or accrual rule as per the act or the treaty, there the EL operator, ecom operator, needs to decide whether EL applies or not, and he will have to do it from the EL operator, ecom operator will have to do the EL compliances from his side. Anything on this case study? Otherwise, I'll move to the case study 2. So case study 2, a slight tweak in fact, instead of directly selling it to the consumer in India as envisaged under case study 1, I have interposed a distributor being an ICO in between FCO and the customer, and therefore, and we are testing the FCO and ICO distributor leg and not the domestic leg between ICO distributor and customer. So there is a distribution agreement between FCO and ICO for sale distribution of software which has been developed by FCO. ICO sells the software to the ultimate customers. Customers pay to ICO for purchase of software license, and ICO further makes the payment to FCO. Now, while ICO is making payment to FCO, whether he is liable to deduct tax under 195, and whether FCO is being an e-commerce operator, whether he is liable to pay EL on this particular transaction is the question. So again, we go by the same flow, whether it is royalty under the act, purchase. So whether purchase for reselling distribution is royalty under the act, whether it makes a difference, whether I am purchasing it for the or selling it to the ultimate consumer, or whether it is sold to a distributor, the argument of copy being sold remains whether it is sold to the ultimate consumer or whether it is sold to the reseller distributor. And probably that is what various ITATs and AARs have ruled. I think I try to name a few that Locus, Dassault, Tech India, Infrasoft. A lot of ITATs and AARs have ruled that there is no real difference in the first case study and the second case study, and therefore it still remains the product which is sold, and therefore there should not be it should not be liable to royalty tax. Samsung had a bunch of rulings, cluster of rulings coming to it from the ITATs, in which some fact patterns were of resellers, some fact patterns were of end users. However, even Samsung has not distincted between the two, because it has gone ahead and said that the moment you are allowed to make a copy on your own hard drive, it becomes a royalty, and they have ended it there. They have not distinctly discussed both these particular thought processes separately. A question here might arise as to whether a distributor gets a right to sell or distribute the software, the copies of the software, and which is one of the right in respect of copyright. Right in respect of copyright would obviously include right to sell copies of that particular copyright or copyrighted article and distribute the same. So these are the two rights which are actually in respect of copyrights. These have not been discussed in majority of the rulings. I think Dassault somewhere touches upon this aspect, but ultimately concludes to say that no, there is no right to sell or distribute which is available with the ICO in the facts of the present case. It is merely a marketing function which they are executing on behalf of FCO. But I would say, what do you mean by marketing function? Marketing function gives you an authority to sell on behalf of the owner and to sell the software on behalf of the owner, which is a right in a copyright. and therefore, really speaking, that aspect has been missed somewhere in the Indian judgments. Probably Supreme Court might look at that aspect and decide upon it, but could be a possibility that in case of a reseller kind of a situation, at least the payment between ICO and reseller might be regarded as not as a sale of product. Even if it is regarded as a sale of product, the distributor gets a right to resell, which could be regarded as a right in the copyright itself. And this particular aspect has been very nicely brought out by Ganesh in his books. Thank you, Ganesh, for highlighting this to me. I don't think he's there, but I've put his name in the acknowledgement because I had a detailed discussion with Ganesh on this particular aspect. So that's one important point which Ganesh has really brought out well in his book, which probably may be considered by courts in future. That's about royalty under the Act in this particular case study. Under the treaty, again, same arguments apply independently what we discussed under the Act. Coming to EL, what happens in case of EL? Now here, software, whether goods or service, we already discussed it is goods. However, whether EL would apply, considering that ICO has acquired a software for reselling and not for the own consumption, I don't think EL distinguishes between end consumer or the person purchasing the software for reselling or redistributing. I would say as long as we can conclude to say that it is sale of a software being goods, and it is online sale of the software being goods by through the platform of the non-resident, by the non-resident, I think EL should squarely apply in the facts of the given case, like in the case study 1. Any points on case study 2? Happy to discuss. Any views, views or counter views on the right to sell, distribute, or on the ITAT judgments or ER judgments which we discussed? Okay, I think I'll move forward. Case study 3. So case study 3 is again a little different fact pattern. The third thing is where somebody.
Karthik, just to interrupt here.
Yes, Inesh bhai.
Yeah, on case study 2, if you can just go back. On a practical level, most of the ICO category, they give some kind of a key actually, which is given to the final customer, a product key basically. And then they log in the website of FCO.
Correct.
And then they can download the software or the license actually.
Absolutely.
This is done in most of the cases. But if that website was supposed to be in India, for example, of FCO, they hosted the site on in India, will there make any different situation or will not make? Because ultimately the payment is made to FCO.
Correct. So from an EL perspective, Inesh bhai, what you need to look at whether the e-commerce operator is non-resident and whether he is owning a digital platform. Whether in India or outside of India, probably EL would not make a difference.
Okay. So whether, I mean, ultimately the e-commerce operator is FCO and it is outside India and it is a non-resident.
It is a non-resident. So and as long as we are saying software is a goods, he is selling goods and therefore he is covered under the EL.
The fact that ICO gives that key does not matter at all, even though it is India to India, right?
Would not matter.
Right.
Okay. Or rather, in that case, you would say that FCO is sold to ICO distributor and it is then sold to customer.
Right.
Ultimately, sell to India still remains.
Right. Okay. Can that not be called as a distribution business agreement actually between FCO and ICO? Instead of a royalty, it is a business distribution agreement. And so covered by business article rather than royalty article.
So I think that is the argument which a lot of people are taking.
Yeah.
But how do you defend the fact that under the business distribution agreement, ICO really gets the right to resell and distribute, and which is a right in a copyright? That's what Ganesh has brought out in his book.
Right.
I was just
because I have seen practically in distribution agreement there is a whatever sale value is there, 40% is retained by the distributor and 60% is given.
Correct.
So they distinguish that this is a business agreement. How we, this UDP hotel rental, they do on sale basis. To avoid rent TDS, they do a business conducting agreement, revenue sharing. This is
Yeah.
what many of the law firms are advising.
Correct.
Then they say no TDS is applicable, and
Yes.
they go by business article. This is what I've
Yes.
seen practically
Yes,
with
they are
our
going by
customers
article.
also actually.
Correct. They are going by article.
Limited. Yeah. But EL will apply now as per what we
EL
have
will
come.
apply.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I have
But
nothing to add.
if I think they have, yeah. If ICO is an independent person, then yes, EL applies. If he becomes a P for the FCO, then in that case, probably
No,
the
ICO
domestic.
is an independent distributor operating for many entities.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinay. Case study 3 is where FCO has a cloud storage facility, a server, in which ICO is paying an annual subscription to access the cloud storage facility, to accept a particular space on that server for storing its own data. Now, turnover of FCO is more than 2 crores, that's the presumption, otherwise the EL does not apply. So question is again whether this is royalty or FTS, and consequently whether 195 TDS applies or whether it is an equalization levy. So whether it is royalty or FTS, for that, firstly, if we look at the royalty clause, there is a clause on right to use of industrial, scientific, or commercial equipment, which becomes relevant for this for a server storage issue. The first question is whether server can be said to be an equipment. I think Pumpuar Shipping is a very nicely explained, elaborated ruling, and it very clearly says that yes, server definitely is an equipment. Going further, if yes, it is an equipment, can you say that the payment for the cloud storage is for the right to use of equipment being the server? So I am just getting a space to store my data on the server. Do I really get the right to use the server? Whether it implies a right to use implies even access to a small space on the server, or it really implies or requires a control or a right over the equipment. What is really necessary is the question to be answered. And I think AsiaSat draws out this distinction in terms of the transponder and a satellite facility use. And it says a satellite or a transponder are actually used by the service provider to render services to the recipient. So here the server is really under the control of FCO, and that server is used to provide some services of allowing a space, storage space on the server by the FCO to ICO, and it does not become, or ICO does not get a right or a control over that server being the equipment. So that's the fine distinction and discussion point, which is up for discussion in this particular case study. As far as the Income Tax Act is concerned, there is Savis, there is People Interactive, Wishwork. All of them say that no, you don't get any right or control over the server when you are saving data or paying subscription for the storage space, and therefore, really speaking, this particular transaction would not fall under the definition of royalty. Now, to specifically encounter this, department has added explanation 5, and it clearly says, for the removal of doubts, it is hereby clarified that royalty includes and has always included consideration in respect of any right, property, or information, whether or not the possession or control of such right, property, or information is with the payer being the ICO in the facts of the present case. And to specifically take this out, they have brought out this explanation 5, and with explanation 5, probably the controversy under the act is put at rest. However, whether explanation 5 extends to the treaty, prima facie answer would be no. And there are arguments as to whether the right to use of equipment phrase has not been defined under the treaty, and therefore the explanation 5 defines or clarifies that particular phrase, and therefore can you import that into the treaty? My view would be no, you cannot import that phrase into the treaty unilaterally without amending the treaty, and therefore I believe the provision under the treaty would still remain the same. If we come to EL, whether FCO is an e-commerce operator, owner of the server providing online storage space, yes, he is surely an e-commerce operator. But whether annual subscription to cloud storage, whether it is regarded as goods or services, it is surely not goods because it's a server space. There is no sale of software. There is no goods, correct? Whether it can be service is a matter of question, because can someone say that making available storage on a server is kind of renting of that space on the server, and accordingly are renting services. Now this kind of a definition is not available anywhere except for GST. But whether can definition of services, which is a very wide definition to try and actually cover everything which is not goods, can you extend really that to the EL? Or really speaking, you would go ahead with a standard definition of service and say that wherever there is a human intervention or a intention to actually provide service to a specific customer on a specific fact basis, on a specific transaction, on a specific instance, is only what is to be regarded as a service. I think matter of litigation, department might want to say that we import the definition of service from the GST law, whereas the assessee might want to go by the traditional definition of service, and therefore probably a matter of debate. I would want to say that you should go with the traditional definition of service. Intention definitely is to cover this kind of a transaction under EL as well. And I think I would rest the discussion on this case study there, unless there is a point to be made by any of the participants here.
So Karthik, you recommend TDS for such payment or no on a practical level? What is your advice to us?
On a practical level, I think we have sufficient, till date all the judgments are favorable to say that no, and under the treaty explanation 5 is not there. So from a treaty perspective, I think it's a fair view to say that I don't have a control, which is why there was a clarification required. And that clarification is not there under the treaty today. So I think it's a fair view to take that this kind of a situation should not be liable.
So no TDS applicability, basically.
Yeah, unless we want to take a
Because
conservative
the problem is none of the clients, US client allows you to deduct tax actually.
Correct.
Because most of them are automated. And if you don't pay full money, your service does not start only actually.
Correct.
So you have to do gross up.
The idea behind insertion was explanation 5 with retrospective effect was to cover these kind of transactions. So we are definitely facing some questions from the department. Right. But I think treaty position is defendable if it comes to the court of law.
Right. Does Article 7 argument stay there? They are in the business of rendering this service. So I'm not covered by Article 12, which is royalty. So that is the business of that entity to provide such service.
So that is how
that is what many are taking argument
that way also. No, that is how you will go. You will first say that although server is an equipment, the user does not have a right or a control over that equipment, and therefore it is not right to use of equipment and consequently not royalty. And once it is not royalty, then you fall back to Article 7. So business income, no P and no.
Yeah, that is what most argument I have seen taken by everyone actually.
Yeah, that will be the flow.
Right. Okay. Okay.
So, but you have to get out of royalty by taking this argument before you jump to Article.
Right. Correct. Okay. Thank you.
Move forward to case study 4, where we move to FTS, advisory services. So ICO appoints FCO and avails the following services in relation to market study, feasibility analysis for setting up a business entity in Japan. So ICO is exploring setting up a business entity in Japan, for which it needs to do a initial feasibility and market study, and it appoints 3 consultants. One basically delivers an email opinion on a particular subject matter, on this particular subject matter. Second, provides online advisory through a Zoom call, correct, where he is not briefed prior to the call. It's just a question answer kind of a thing on the call, on a 1-hour call. We raise and he replies from his past experience and whatever he studied in past, without any debriefing before the call. And I'll come to why I have added that specific fact pattern. And third is where the ICO is only accessing a specific write-up posted on a website of the FCO by paying subscription fee. Now, please presume that all these three FCOs are different. One giving an email opinion, second giving advisory through the Zoom call, and the third FCO giving, it's not the same person. Third FCO giving having a website on which there is a write-up which is posted of how of doing business in Japan and feasibility analysis and all those things, which is access for a subscription paid. Turnover of all three FCOs is more than 2 crores, is what we have to presume. Then the discussion becomes interesting. And here again, question whether what happens under the act and whether EL is applicable. So if I go for the first option, which is an opinion on an email, whether it is an FTS under the act, I would say surely would fall under the definition of consultancy services, and therefore it would be an FTS under the act. However, whether it will be taxable under the accrual rule available under 917. The accrual rule clearly says that if a resident is making a payment, it would not be taxed in India, or it would not be deemed to accrue or arise in India if the resident is availing these services for the purpose of overseas business or profession, or for the purpose of earning a source of income outside India. And in the facts of the present case, probably a view can be taken that this particular services which are availed from the FCO are availed by Indian company to set up a business abroad, and therefore it is in relation to an overseas business profession that this service will be utilized, and therefore it might go out under the FTS accrual rule under 917 itself. Whether it will be covered under Article 12 of India-Japan DTA, yes, it will be covered, but then and where the treaty definition, treaty accrual rule, horizon rule is talks about the payer being the resident of India. So there, although I might fall, but if I go out of the act, I don't need to look at the treaty, and whichever is beneficial applies to me. And therefore, I would go by 917 to say that this FTS, although being an FTS, it might not be taxable in India. Now, if we come to EL, what happens? Is FCO an e-commerce operator? Where FCO is drafting an email opinion and sending it through Gmail or through Yahoo email ID. FCO does not own any e-commerce portal. It does not own any electronic facility or a digital platform, and therefore squarely FCO does not become an e-commerce operator. Is there anybody else who is an e-commerce operator? Can you say Gmail or Yahoo is an e-commerce operator, and therefore Gmail or Yahoo is facilitating provision of service online through FCO? Certainly we can evaluate that situation. Point number one is Gmail or Yahoo would definitely be an e-commerce operator if, I'll go back to the first slide. It says a non-resident who owns, operates or manages digital or electronic facility. Yes, Gmail, Yahoo all are operating electronic facility or platform for online sale of goods or online provision of services. Now, neither Gmail nor Yahoo nor Hotmail would have envisaged to say that I am specifically creating this facility for online sale of goods or provision of services. This facility has always been created for communication between two people. Again, there could be a possibility that I am using Gmail and my customer is using Yahoo. So there are two different e-commerce operator involved in a particular transaction. But I think from the face of it, Gmail or Yahoo or email service provider should not be regarded as an e-commerce operator, and therefore the charge of EL fails there itself in the particular example. A second argument for non-applicability of EL could be that it requires online provision of service, and therefore a question arises as to whether forming an opinion offline, well, the hard work is done offline, and merely a communication which has happened online through an email, correct, would it really amount to online provision of service? I would certainly say no. The service is actually provided offline. It is only communicated or delivered online, and delivery for services, as we said, is not really important. Provision is what is important. So there has to be a physical provision of services online. And again, in that argument also, probably in this fact pattern on an email, when an advisory is issued, the provisions of EL should not apply. Coming to online advisory on a Zoom call, whether it is FTS under the Act, I think the answer would remain the same as for the email. under the Act and the treaty. When we come to EL, FCO, we said it is not an e-commerce operator given the facts of the case, but whether the answer changes if FCO, whether answer changes if there is no forming of opinion on offline, which I have put down as the facts itself, and FCO is owning a proprietary software, which is the third bullet point. So instead of using Zoom, if FCO use its own proprietary software, which is actually custom made for himself, for FCO, to provide such kind of advisory opinions, correct? In that case, can you say, yes, FCO is an e-commerce operator who is the owner of the platform? Certainly, yes. That platform is formed to deliver advisory opinions to its clients. So it is it is set up to provide, the platform is set up to provide online provision of services, to make an online provision of services. In that case, if the opinion is formed offline, debriefed offline, and only communicated again through the platform, the answer would remain the same as email. However, if there is a one-to-one question, there could be two views. One view could be that it's a one-to-one questioning and answering happening on the platform. And therefore, I would want to say that it's an online provision of services there itself on the platform itself. However, somebody might want to argue that no, even when I am answering something, it is out of my past experience, or it is out of what I have read in past. Like, my answers might be impromptu or given at the point of time, but it involves some study which has happened in past, and some forming of opinion which I have done in past in case of other clients or in case of readings that I have done. And therefore it is still an opinion which is generated offline and only communicated through proprietary software, and therefore probably there could be an argument to say that EL should not apply. So I don't have a specific answer in this second fact pattern where I am owning a proprietary software, and I would be happy if there is any discussion on this particular aspect. The fact pattern is I'm owning my own software. I am an e-com operator. That software is specifically made for online provision of services. But I am doing a one-to-one call without any debriefing before the call. What are the participants' views? Any discussion of you on this aspect? Okay, I think I will leave it as a food for thought.
Karthik,
Yes.
just one intervention.
Yeah.
I'm not going in the proprietary software issue. I'm rather lying on that online advisory on a Zoom call.
Okay.
So rather than, an online advisory, if there is a situation where there is an online training on a Zoom call. So what we like CTC is organizing this kind of a platform. So if CTC or IBFD, suppose Netherlands is organizing a webinar or a conference, which we all are participating into.
Correct.
And that is happening on the e-commerce platform.
Yes.
And whenever a presentation is being given, certainly a knowledge is being passed on.
Correct.
To my knowledge, in the past, when FTS was there, we were taking the consideration that since there is no make available of knowledge happening, it is just transmission of the whatever the speaker knows. He is telling us, but he is not making you equipped to train the people. That is the reason make available is not happening. So it is not an FTS service. Now we have come to an era where we are saying that there is an equalization levy applicable on e-commerce services. We have also said that department has the intention that whenever the services were taxable under a royalty or FTS, they would continue to be taxed under royalty and FTS.
Correct.
Okay. Now in this scenario, what used to happen is FTS was there under section 917 for a training service on a Zoom call, but because of make available, I was getting out. So my taxability under Act remained.
Yes.
Yeah. But now the scenario is, will the department still take this view that because you're taxable under the Act, The EL should not be applicable to you, although you are availing a treaty benefit as to make available.
Again, the law, Hina, as it stands today, and thank you, this was one of the case studies which you brought out, which is going to follow, but we can discuss it right now, so no problem. But the law as it stands today, it's other way around, that if EL applies, then Act does not apply, correct? But if the clarification comes, we'll have to see the shape and manner in which it comes. Logically, if treaty is giving me some relief, which is an intended relief of the treaty, like you said, a make available kind of a situation where I don't want to tax you, just because it becomes a digitized services or online provision of services, my opinion should not change that now I want to levy EL. Correct? And therefore, I think it will be a welcome move if whenever the clarification comes that whatever is already taxable under the Act, if or whatever is actually covered under the Act, that is not liable to EL. If that clarification is supported by this particular clarification also, that what is not intended to be taxed under the treaty also should not be liable to EL. So probably that should come up. Today, the law as it stands, it's the other way around. EL applies, and if EL applies, we are saying Act does not apply. So if we read it today,
So
at least from the next
today
year
we
onwards,
should go by.
today, I think
Today
EL
we should go by. Today we should go by this view that EL will apply and
will
Act will not apply, even though there is certain kind of clarifications issued on forums that the intent is Act should apply first and the EL should apply next.
But without the change or an official notification,
Without the change in law, correct.
and an official notification, I don't think you will be relying on the informal opinions shared on the forum.
Sure.
But it'll be great, as you rightly pointed out, it'll be great if the exemption under the EL is specifically talks about this kind of situations where the intention itself is not to tax this kind of services under the treaty parlance.
Yeah. Thanks, Karthik.
I
I think
think
Pankaj,
by-
you can unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, Pankaj.
Yeah, thank you. Karthik bhai, as we see the e-commerce operator, the definition is very wide. Matlab, just you said one example you given is Zoom or his own platform. So even if it is on Zoom, will it not fall under operates or electronic facility?
Again, whether Zoom has operated or set up, owned this electronic facility for the purpose of online provision of services or online sale of goods, I would say no. It is for a communication. Zoom has no restrictions. Zoom would say you can do a birthday party also and we've been doing it in the lockdown situation. We've been doing birthday parties, kitty parties, XYZ, all form of parties, all personal interactions on Zoom. We've been meeting our old school friends on Zoom and discussing nothing which is related to provision of service. So it has to be specifically for the purpose of online provision of service that or sale of goods that the platform has to be created.
So Zoom meeting is only for provision of service. Matlab, you are rightly said that it can be for anything.
Yeah, it
But
is not
this
for
Zoom meeting
provision
is
of
for
service.
online provision of services.
So it is not for online provision of services. It could be for any communication. Like an email can be for any communication.
Yeah, that is true, but this advisory call on Zoom is for the purpose of providing services.
So different users will use it in a different manner.
Yes.
But what e-commerce operator definition talks about, you have to see it vis-a-vis the person owning the platform. Now, person owning the platform is Zoom, not the service provider.
Right.
And therefore, Zoom has not created this software for the purpose of online provision of service.
Okay.
If that can be justified, then he doesn't become an e-commerce operator in the first place.
Right. Okay.
And that's why I have tried to tweak the fact to say that what if the advisor himself, the FO himself, have a proprietary software of his own, which is specifically created for his business services. And in that case, probably I would say that the argument that he is not an e-commerce operator should not hold good.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Move forward. The third consultant was allowing me to access a write-up from his website for a payment of subscription. Now, whether this is an FTS, I think we have Kotak Securities, which says that service provided or facility offered, distinguishes between service provided or facility offered, and it says that such kind of a thing where it is only I'm downloading something at a click from a website for payment of fee is not really a service provided, and therefore it's a facility offered of downloading some content from their database, from their website. And even Bharti Cellular supports the view that human intervention is necessary, and therefore the law, I think the judicial precedents as we have today, this should not really qualify as a FTS under the act or under the treaty, and therefore strictly speaking under the act or the treaty this goes out. But when it comes to EL, whether FCO is an e-commerce operator, yes, it is an e-commerce operator. Whether access to write-up available on a website for paying a subscription would amount to online provision of services. I think going by the same argument which is taken in the Kotak Securities and Bharti Cellular Limited, I would say that this does not become online provision of services. Therefore, a question arises as to whether it is a product, a report which is extracted, whether it is a product and therefore it is nothing but an online sale of goods. I would not tend to take that goods again, as we say, as we saw in Infosys, that it has to be something which can be transmitted, transferred. Basically it should be something which I can sell to someone going forward. It should be capable of being bought and sold. Now these are for consumption of somebody who is buying it, and strictly not for reselling, and therefore to that extent probably it might not qualify. Though somebody might want to take that view, but it still strictly in my opinion might not qualify as goods, and therefore probably might be out of EL as well. So accessing a write-up or a content from a website, I am or of an advisory opinion, might not really fall under either online provision of service or online sale of goods. If the content is something which is customized for the customized or something like a Netflix or something, then probably it will fall under online provision of service, because the content is bought, kept on the website by somebody like Netflix or Amazon Prime, and then it is made available at a service request from the customer, and therefore from that perspective that might still qualify. There could be a fine difference between the two, therefore it might still qualify as an online provision of service and might be liable.
Karthik, even as before this Kotak and Bharti, there is a classic case of Dun and Bradstreet, which was a very old decision.
Data, yeah.
Very clear, where you just download a report, pay the money, and it was not taxable as FTS in India. So I think it's very settled thing as regards to downloading a report or a research report or a ready product actually.
Agree.
And then after that, so many decisions have come after Dun and Bradstreet.
Yep. Thank you, Anish.
Only now they would be liable for EL, which
EL again. If you go with the judgments, if Kotak really says that it is not service in the first place, in that case, so while
but does EL define human service again?
No, it does not define human service.
FTS I can understand, but I think EL is more larger.
No, but Hinesh bhai, when we talk about Kotak Securities, it is not only talking about FTS versus facility. It is talking about service versus facility, and then saying it is not service in the first place, so forget about being FTS. So if we read that two paragraphs, there is a finer difference. That's why I've tried to quote Kotak Securities, because it distinguishes between service and a facility. Something which is provided as a service. Service in itself means that you are requesting me something and I'm working upon it and providing it to you. Whereas a facility is something which is standardly available somewhere and you are just using those facilities. So that's the distinction that Kotak has tried to bring out, and probably if that is to be hold good, then you might say that EL does not apply in such cases.
Then Netflix and everybody will not pay, because they are again having everything automated. I'm not giving it for you only. It is available for everybody. Then nobody will pay EL also.
Correct.
Okay.
A finer difference, Hitesh, could be that they are buying some contents or creating some contents for the specific purpose of the viewers, and then making them available, those things. Whereas these reports would be something which are generally available for downloads. So I don't know whether that that different distinction can operate in terms of, but certainly department's intention is to cover both these cases.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
probably better to take a view that way.
Correct.
There is something in the chat box. Subscription to online report giving outlook to price and supply of raw materials will not result into consultancy services. Yeah, I think we said it will result into consultancy services. But a ready access to a write-up is what these judgments, as Hinesh also rightly pointed out, that it does not amount to a human intervention and therefore will not be FTS, because FTS actually requires some human intervention on a specific case-to-case basis. I think I'll have about 20 minutes more. I'll try to move further on the case studies. Yeah, so case study 5 is the training service, which Hina already raised a point, and that was the point which I wanted to discuss about the exemption and the intention to have an exemption with respect to the whatever is taxable or chargeable under the Act, and probably a clarification that might be helpful if what is otherwise not intended to be taxed because of the treaty provision should not unnecessarily get covered under EL. So that was, I think we already discussed it in the earlier case study. So I'll skip this and take it as discussed. Next is a issue where there is a USACO. FCO is a USACO which provides online services to an individual, Mr. X, who is residing in USA. Services are utilized by Mr. X for his own US business. Mr. X is a resident but not ordinary resident of India as per the new provisions of the Income Tax Act, because he's in India, he has some income in India, investment income in India, and which is more than 50 lakhs, and he's in India for more than 120 days to meet his family and friends. So he does not have any business in India, he just has business in US. Now here is a classic transaction where it's a transaction between US and US. The US service provider, who we have to assume that he is an e-commerce operator, then this case study makes sense. So is an US online service provider, provides online services to another person sitting in US who utilizes and consumes it for the purpose of his own business. Just because that consumer, the recipient of service, is an NOR, let's see how things take turn in terms of EL. And first question would be, how does the Act treat this particular transaction? So whether it is FTS under the Act, yes, this will be FTS under the Act. We are presuming that there is human intervention and it's not a standard service. However, services are utilized for his US business. It's a totally overseas transaction. 917 does not intend to tax this particular transaction. Under the treaty, yes, it says payer whether resident of India, but even if you go to Article 4, more likely than not, in the fact of the case that I have said, that I might break in favor of US, or probably we presume, and therefore under the treaty also this is not taxable in the hands of FCO. However, when we come to EL says any service provided by an e-commerce operator, being the US company, if the services are online, if there is an online provision of service, and if it is provided to a resident of India, then EL becomes applicable. So in this kind of a case, probably the non-resident e-commerce operator will end up paying EL in India, because the EL law clearly says that you have to go back to Income Tax Act for terms which are not defined. And as per Income Tax Act, Mr. X, the NOR, who will really fall under the definition of a resident, even though NOR. So even though his taxability is not impacted, but because of his residential status, barely because he is NOR, FCO's taxability gets impacted on this particular transaction. This could even be true for a case of a company who is using the services and having a POEM in India, and because of which under the domestic law it becomes a resident of India under POEM provisions. So even in that cases, probably now question is how does the FCO come to know that he is dealing with a NOR? Again, all these things are to be are procedural issues are there. How does FCO know that somebody is accessing of Indian IP address is still possible, but probably they might have to, before you trade on a online platform, they might have to give you a checkbox saying that are you NOR of India, are you resident or ordinary resident of India, what is your residential status. All those things probably might have to be built in going forward to be sure about whom you are actually serving, because residence, see, location can still be identified, but residence is a technical concept. How does a service provider or a e-commerce operator identify whether he is dealing with a resident or a non-resident? So I think that was the finer point which I wanted to bring out in this particular case study.
Karthik,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karthik. So Karthik, my small submission here was in case of your example, if USA company is a investment advisor is an investment advisor organization who has its own software proprietary products, which as an Indian citizen I subscribe to, and they advise on a different kind of investment aspects, mutual funds or units that you need to buy. Now, there are two situations which can be possible. The software platform which I'm accessing could be the one which is hosted outside India. Then, what would be the case on the EL applicability? And if the software is hosted in India, and this USA company is selling me this investment advisory through the subsidiary in India.
Sorry, I didn't get the facts. You have a US company which is owning a platform.
Online investment advisory service platform.
Okay.
Okay, and you go to its website, you have to just log in, put in
So
your details, put in your investment goals, and it becomes an investment advisor for you.
So USCO becomes an e-commerce operator. That's perfect.
USCO becomes an e-commerce operator. Now, it doesn't make a difference. You said that the proprietary
Platform
software hosted in India or outside India.
Correct.
Okay. So if it is hosted in India or outside India, but the seller is the US company, EL would be applicable.
Seller is a seller is a US company, and who is the recipient of service. I think you mentioned two situations, right? Direct provision of service.
No, seller is the US company and I am the Indian resident who is subscribing to their investment advisory product.
Correct.
So EL will be applicable.
Yes, applicable. Absolutely.
Okay. Now here, can't we take that plea that actually what is happening is the whole investment advisory, like we are saying that, now when a chartered accountant is rendering his services, the whole thing is the backup he is doing is separate. Like I am doing my work in UK, but then I'm just communicating it through a platform, say email or say by a note or anything. So
I think
doesn't that apply to?
There will be a difference if software, if it is software based advisory, where probably something that a software does, some calculations and everything that a software does, and then it is providing an advisory vis-a-vis an opinion which is formed offline. So if you can try and prove that the opinion was formed offline, which was fed into the platform just for a communication purposes, then probably you might get out.
Yeah, because typically what happens is all these investment advisory platform, they will list down that today's best sellers, or this you should buy, this you should sell. So this is something not which generally a software would calculate. For this you need investment advisors who are sitting in the background and thinking what actually to buy and what actually to sell. I'm only communicating it through my proprietary software. Hello.
Karthik, we have lost you.
Just a moment. I'll just try to reach him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Karthik is back.
Karthik, you are on mute. Huh?
Sorry, I think there was a network glitch. Sorry, I don't know where did I get cut?
Yeah. So I think we were just waiting for you to speak.
Yeah, I
We
think
couldn't hear you.
I think there will be a subtle difference where there is a request for an opinion and there is just a communication online. Sorry, vis-a-vis
Karth-
where there is a, now you can hear me?
Yeah, your voice got cut, disconnected in between. No problem.
Yeah. So vis-a-vis where there is a content which is made available online for the masses. Probably that is the finer difference that we are looking at, where probably you are using the digital platform to actually sell the services, vis-a-vis a case where you are actually providing services offline.
Okay. My take there was that Kathik, actually it could be different versions to that, but
Correct.
again the background working is all because as a subscriber, if I've subscribed to those softwares, there are generally customizations that I want a certain ratio to be maintained. So there could be a different advisory for me and a different advisory for X or different advisory for Y. Based
Correct.
on my portfolio, the advisory would keep on changing.
Correct.
However, this proprietary software will assist me to see what my value today is, how my, the graphics and all. It will give me all that facilitation. But the ultimate thing for which I am subscribing is that investment advisory portion. And what the proprietary software is doing, it is helping in communicating that advisory. So my question there is that whether we can take that plea that the entire background work is still happening in the US, and it is only the communication which is happening through the proprietary software. It is not software which is actually rendering,
So
providing
again,
something.
as you said, if there is a background work happening vis-a-vis each customer which is just communicated online, background work happening offline vis-a-vis each customer which is just communicated online, then probably it is equivalent to an advisory kind of a situation which we are saying. But if there is some content which I am creating for say 10 different types of people or 5 different types of people, and the one who the one who is more suitable to that particular content access is online, then the intention is to sell things online, and therefore to that extent the view might change and the argument might become weak. That's my submission.
Okay, thanks, Karthik.
So I'll move forward on this NOR query. Only a finer point that just because an NOR is a recipient, it might be subjected to the EL. Is done. How much time we have? I think 10 minutes. No? So quickly running through last 3 case studies in 10 minutes. Here is a case where EFCO assists ICO in making an online advertisement for the products, and that ICO and that's on. The question is whether this is leviable to year 2016, whether this is leviable to year 2020, and what is the position under the act, and which really overrides the other. Yes, Raj.
Karthik, on the facts, actually, we had lost you for in between. So again, can you repeat?
So I'll just repeat that. So fact is that there is a foreign company which is providing online advertisement designing services to ICO for the products of the ICO, which ICO manufactures and sells. Right? The query is whether it is liable to year 2016, whether it is liable to year 2020, what is the position under the Income Tax Act, and how does one interplay with the other or one override the other. So this clearly will be covered under services incidental to the advertisement, and therefore covered under the specified services as per EL 2016. We are assuming the threshold and everything is met, and therefore saying that EL 2016 will apply. When it comes to EL 2020, these services, as I said, are provided online, and therefore, really speaking, we will try to take a view that EL 2020 also applies. The person is e-commerce operator and is providing services online, and therefore EL 2020 also applies standalone. And then we come under the Act. This should also qualify as fees for technical services under the Act, because it's not an automated service, there is a human intervention, and therefore I would strictly say it is technical service under the Act also. I'm not getting into treaty make available argument. Let's just discuss the interplay between Act EL 2020 and EL 2016. Now, what overrides the other? So firstly, when it comes to EL 2020, it clearly says that wherever EL 2016 is leviable, EL 2020 does not apply. So we are out of EL 2020. When we come to the exemption under 1050, please note that the applicability which we spoke about, which is delayed by a year or there is a mismatch, which starts from the next year, is only with respect to EL 2020. The exemption under 1050 with respect to EL 2016 is already in existence since 2016 and continues to be in existence. And therefore, as long as EL 2016 applies, 1050 is amply clear that we are out of the Income Tax Act 917 provision under the FTS provisions. And therefore, this transaction would be leviable to 6% EL under EL 2016. Now, a question for discussion here is that in this kind of a situation, the government has been happily giving exemptions since past 4 years to a 10% rate under 917 in the facts of this case, vis-a-vis a 6% rate under EL 2016. But when it comes to EL 2020, the government is trying to take a view that no, we don't want to take out the things which are already covered under royalty and FTS under the 10% rate and give you a benefit of the new EL 2020 there. You can't take that plea that if EL applies, EL 2020 applies, FTS royalty are done away with. That benefit is not available. Probably it was not thought for earlier because of two reasons. One, the coverage, as I earlier said, was very low of EL 2016. And secondly, the difference was 6% versus 10%. However, under EL 2020, the difference is coming to 2% versus 10%, and therefore compromising on an 8% would probably not be the thing that government is looking at, and therefore, so we'll wait to see again whether when they clarify that EL the Income Tax Act provisions overrides the EL. Whether they do it only vis-a-vis EL 2020 or they do it vis-a-vis 2016 as well. And probably the answer to this case study may change depending upon the clarification that is coming out. So again, that was the final issue and the point which I wanted to bring out of this case study on the interplay. Moving quickly forward, last 5 minutes. Here there is an FCO 1 and FCO 2. FCO 2 is the e-commerce operator who is the online service provider. FCO 1 being the group parent enters into a master service agreement with FCO 2 of providing certain online services to the entire group. And the group has ICO, it has FCO 3 and FCO 4 and FCO 1 itself. So FCO 2 provides online services to all the particular group entities, all the 4 group entities. And there is a cross charge. The FCO 1 is internally attributed certain amounts. And there is a gross charge of services between FCO 2, 3, 1, ICO between FCO 1, FCO 3 and FCO 4. So FCO 1 makes the entire payment to FCO 2 and ICO then reimburses or FCO 1 cross charges from ICO and FCO 1 cross charges from FCO 3 and FCO 4. Now, in this kind of a structure, FCO 2 becomes an e-commerce e-commerce operator. It is providing online services. It is providing online services under a single contract for a lump sum consideration to 5 entities, one of which is a resident of India. In such a case, how do you really apply EL? How do you attribute the consideration which is applicable to services provided to ICO? The law is silent on this. FCO 2 might not have access to how the services are, how the cross charge has been done in the internal books, and therefore probably again in this kind of a case, probably a clarification may be required as to what could be the amount on which you will apply the EL. Any comments on this particular case study? Welcome. Again, the issue was there is no answer to this. The issue was that how do you really apportion what is attributable to the services provided to ICO. Next is last case study. I think this also in a way we discussed. The thing is FCO 1 provides technical services online. Services qualifies online provision of services. FCO 1's turnover is 1.75 crore for the next financial year 21-22 when the exemption kicks in. The exemption as it reads today, it says that you are not liable to tax under the Act if you are liable to EL 2020. Now, how does a payer, being a service recipient, know whether the EL e-commerce operator's turnover is exceeding 1.75 crore, whether he is liable to EL or not? How does an ICO? So I see in practically in all the possible circumstances, and it's not that you have to pay EL transaction to transaction basis, that you can provide a challan to the Indian payer to say that here I have already paid the EL, so now you don't deduct tax on the payments that you make to me. Now in that particular case, I think practically all these transactions will have a TDS which will be deducted by the Indian customers wherever it is applicable due to royalty and FTS coverage. And therefore, even if the exemption kicks in the way it is, assuming it is not amended by the department like they have said to other way around, if it kicks in the way it is, then from next year onwards, all payments will suffer a TDS, even though ultimately it might be exempted, and probably FCO 1 will have to file a return claim a refund if ultimately it is liable to a equalization levy. I think I am done with all the case studies here. Thank you for the patient hearing. Happy to take up any discussions.
Karthik,
Yes, Dinesh.
suppose a company was doing manual processing of vendor registration and enrollment initially. If I want to trade with a company, I have to first become a vendor, register, and then I can start business with the company, for example.
Correct.
Now they decide, okay, now instead of manual, I will set up my website. Everybody register on the website rather than me doing it manually, seeing whether your GST number, you have how many years of turnover, net worth, etc.
Correct.
Now doing business and placing order online by my vendor on my website, will it amount to e-commerce operator and EL will be there? Because my intention is use this as a medium to reduce my workload. Do I become an e-commerce operator because I'm going to use a website to do my further transaction with my vendor, which I was doing it originally by telephone or by email.
Correct.
Now I'm doing it through a website.
Correct. So I think, Dinesh, what we need to really see is that whether there is a conclusion of sale on the website. I don't think.
No, there will be no conclusion.
Yeah. So then there is no sale, online sale of goods or online provision of service, and therefore it might be liable.
It won't be applied. Okay.